Welcome to the Co-Authoring Chronicles podcast, 2 voices, 1 tale.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Helen Corvis, a author and lover of weird words.
And it's me, Steaphan, and I don't have any witty description of me.
Excellent. And thus we make a beautiful pair for your podcast today. Today's topic is the transgressive loves of Shakespeare. And I know Shakespeare is oldie-timey. Some of us, it's definitely not accessible with the words, but Shakespeare has his place in storytelling and in history. And I think it's worth looking at some of the outrageous topics that he covered in his plays.
I'm going to come clean and say that I didn't do well in English when we read Shakespearean plays and such. And as an adult, I never went back. So I'm going to lean on you for this episode. I do have some knowledge or opinion on Shakespeare as it relates to like actual English grammar and word use and such. So I'm really excited to hear what you found and what you enjoy from Shakespeare.
Thank you. But I think you also do have an opinion about Shakespeare beyond that, don't you?
The bottom line, I think, and it kind of goes with the grammar thing too, is that he pushed lots of boundaries of all sorts of types, including the boundaries of language at his time.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, totally agree. So, okay, so here we go. There are a few things from Shakespeare that I wanted to bring up, but the first one is actually called Taming of the Shrew. And believe it or I can't believe this about myself, because it used to be my favorite Shakespeare play. And then when I grew up, it was like my least favorite. Taming of the Shrew is this kind of, in some ways, a farcical representation about this macho man who dominates a feisty woman. And at first you think, oh, that's good romance, right? It's gives you those echoes of like enemies to lovers and things like that. But once you start looking at the words Shakespeare uses, it really gets like straight out offensive.
Yeah.
Uh,
Are you going to read some of that offensiveness?
oh God, everyone prepare yourselves, prepare your
All right.
So here's a pretty solid representation. This is the male lead speaking to the woman he intends to have for his wife. And he tells her, thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, the one that cares for thee. And for thy maintenance commits his body to painful labor while you lie warm at home, secure and safe. So that's actually just like the start of it. And I kind of paraphrased a tad. So please don't, Shakespeare, please don't strike me down. But he goes on to talk about, and this is where stuff really gets like wild to me, but he says that such duty as the subject owes the prince, ever such a woman owes to her husband. And when she is forward, peevish, sullen, sour, and not obedient to his honest will, what is she but a foul contending rebel and graceless traitor to her loving lord? I'm ashamed that women are so simple to offer war where they should kneel for peace. And I'll stop there because it just gets like even worse. But I think the drift is like really evident there.
But you said, I think that he's kind of being over the top here. It was supposed to be humorous,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
what if it wasn't? What if that was thought of the time or roughly?
Right? It's exactly the point is he really is, and like a lot of people want to do today, right, is to call out a troubling behavior by kind of pushing it to the extreme. And in this play, the extreme that it goes to is by the end, there's this scene where the male lead starts demanding that his wife call the sun the moon, right? He's literally out there and he does it in front of all of the servants of the household. And he's like telling her, he's like, I look in the sky and I see the moon. Tell me you see the moon too. And
Mhm.
it's this wild point where and this is where I think it's the other part of it is worth examining, right? Is as authors or even as people who interpret how a story goes, you do have some control even at this stage because Words are one thing, but how you present those words is another. And as the play is written, his wife says, "Oh, yeah, I see the moon too." But depending on how they present it, sometimes she is doing this in a very submissive way. "Oh, you're absolutely right. I see the moon. You're the man." But in other ways, sometimes she's actually saying, "Oh, sure, that's the moon," you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the sign that she's still like indomitable in the face of ridiculousness.
So I think we've generally improved as a human society, but for those hundreds of years, not as much as you'd think.
Not as much as you think. This is actually like at the end of the 1500s into early 1600s.
Mhm.
Um, And so, yeah, right? So I think there's a lot to be said for calling things out, I think, in our writing. We can easily just, and I think it was one of the Pixar quotes, right? We can't just say things are cool. You have to show why they're cool. Or in this case, we can't just go ahead and assume that some of these things are just understood. Well, of course, this woman is a traitor to her husband for having her own opinions. Ha, right? But
Mhm.
we also have to show it. And I think there's a lot to be said about when we talk about show, don't tell, but
Mhm.
also these components of society that continue to be part of our characters' lives.
Yeah. Hey, what other
All
what
right.
other things you have here?
Okay, so this one is actually my favorite Shakespeare play, and it's Twelfth Night. And the premise of Twelfth Night, and the reason I love it even still, is it's about the main character named Viola is a woman who gets separated from her twin brother. She gets shipwrecked on a foreign land, and because she's worried about her safety, she pretends to be a man. And as a man, she starts working for this very, handsome duke. She falls in love with him, but he's in love with another woman, and he keeps sending Viola over with love letters to this other woman, which you can already see like the inherent like pain and strife going on. But when our main character, who's disguised as a man, goes to deliver these letters, the other woman decides to fall in love with her instead. So it's almost like a love triangle, but it's like a love triangle where two parts of the triangle are contained within one person. And maybe it's like a love, I don't even know, rhombus or something. I can't tell. But it's amazingly gender bending, which I know Shakespeare was familiar with, but I'm always kind of surprised. Do you ever people really consider what it was like for somebody to be, a woman presenting as a man, contemplating love? And Shakespeare did that.
Yeah, he got an alibi for the time, making it a question. Does he really like same gender or does he not? But then the alibi was that it was a woman after all.
Hmm.
So didn't have to take all the heat, I guess.
Right? And it's interesting because there's this interesting quote from Olivia, and it just kind of encapsulates that struggle for her. It goes, "What will become of all of this? In my disguise as a man, I have no hope of winning Orsino's love. But as I am really a woman, Olivia's love for me is hopeless too." And that's kind of an interesting tension, I think, that carries throughout the whole play. But there's
Mm.
also this nice description of this is Count Orsino, who's describing our main character, who says, believe it, for you what's it? For they shall yet belie their happy years that say thou art a man. Diana's lip is not more smooth and rubious. Thy small pipe is as the maiden's organ, shrill and sound. All is semblative of a woman's part. So even in this quote, really, the Duke Orsino is saying that, even though the character, could be a young man, they also seem to be like a woman, which raises questions about his attraction because he marries her in the end. But the whole
Mhm.
time he's known her, she was a man. So
Yeah. broaching the themes, but not. I don't know. Do you think he was testing the waters, or did he? Do you think he? When I say he, Shakespeare fully went there. I guess
Right.
that's the way of putting it.
And the funny part is a lot of times, and I don't know the answer, right? I'm
Mhm,
also not a Shakespearean scholar, but what I love about people when they direct this play is you can go a few ways into this, right? You could make it funny. You could go as far as having the characters like, embrace each other during some odd moments, right? It's not like Shakespeare has, in my opinion, a ton of like stage directions to accompany his words. So, or maybe he does and I don't know it. So there's a lot of creative space. And again, I think as I said before, as a writer, that space is also yours to fill, right? And I do know that's been an increasing and wonderful trend in writing these days is to have more and more romance novels that cross like our traditional was it heteronormative, relationships and branch into these spaces so that we can all read about it. And so that's the other reason I wanted to bring this up. Okay. So do you feel that actually in your own work, if I may take a moment to interview you, do you feel that you've kind of crossed these boundaries as well in your own work?
throughout history, creators create off the backs of our forebears, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I would say I take liberties. I have taken liberties, and at some point, I'm guessing Shakespeare probably had to do it too, except for fear of. Well, in today's day and age, it could be the same, I suppose, but for fear of his life, like he was going in places and saying things that in circles that probably weren't well received by many. Um, and I would love to say that as writers today, that's not the case, but I don't think we're out of those woods yet. But I do think we have a lot more liberty and openness to all sorts of different topics, anything an author might want to write. And that kind of ties in, I think, with I was talking about with Shakespeare, and he manipulated the English language for his time, right? Like he did things that many other writers weren't doing, and may have considered blasphemy in writing, if you will. For example, he was supposed to be the master of iambic pentameter, right?
Yeah.
Where you space out your syllables in certain pairs and makes it sound a certain way when it's being read, and do an exploration into character psychology, like
Mhm.
really getting deep into what makes people tick, which was somewhat, a nuance back then, I think, from what
Mhm.
I understand. Um, and he did this blending of what was considered modern classical speech, everyday speech back then.
Mhm.
He would kind of tweak how he used words and phrases, and in some cases, inventing new use of words that we still use today. He did this soliloquies, if I say that correctly, the speeches and the plays. He would have one person on the stage speaking their thoughts and feelings out loud.
Yeah.
And that was really key to a lot of what Shakespeare did, or his brand, if you will. So I just really like how he went where he wanted to, and in like the topics that you've covered so far,
Mhm.
really went places that no one else was going at the time.
And I think you identified a really key part, right? Because he manipulated the language a little, you can get away with a lot sometimes in how you couch your words.
Mhm.
So my suspicion is this is, part of his wonder. So I have my final example, which is from Othello. And if everyone is familiar or not familiar, Othello is a story of an older black man who is a general in the military who marries a younger white woman. And it's an interracial relationship. And the villain of the play, Iago, um, makes a lot of like racist comments about Othello. He doesn't like him because he's black. He stirs up jealousy in others and uses it to try to. It's Othello is a tragedy, because basically in the end, Iago convinces Othello that his young wife is cheating on him, and Othello is driven to such a jealous rage, that in the end he winds up killing his wife, and in some way, unfortunately, has been driven to this kind of terrible act, partially based on the racism of others. And you can see it, and Shakespeare describes this. And as I was doing the show notes or the preparation for this, Stefan was like, "Oh my, are we going here? Are we going here, Helen?" It's because the words are still offensive. They're still horrible and shocking, right? So yeah. So here's an example of Iago or I mean, I'm sorry, it's an example of people talking about Othello, and it's just saying, "What full fortune does the thick lips owe if he can carry it thus?" Right? So they're already making comments about his appearance. Or here's another one where they're talking about how Othello is married to the younger white woman. "Even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe."
Mm. I had to look that up. Tupping means what you think it means here.
Oh
I
yes, and
wasn't.
yes, they're even actually talking about, like, phrases that Shakespeare made famous. This is the play where, the phrase "making the beast with two backs" comes from, when they're talking about and they are talking about having sex. And there's just a lot of comments, that compare Othello to here, an animal, a ram, a beast, you know? So
Yeah.
it's pretty terrible. And there's this terrible quote towards the end about Othello, as he discusses it when he's finally convinced his wife is cheating on him, where he just kind of says, "I saw it not, I thought it not, and it harmed me not. I'm sorry, it harmed not me." So until he thought about, until he believed that his wife was cheating on him, it was okay, but now he's in this terrible state. So it is a tragedy. And the reason I call this out is not to point out that racism has been around since, forever, but also to say that these are still good topics, I think, to discuss the ramifications of, even just a little bit in our work when it pops up, right? It's not something that has been resolved, equitably, peacefully, and even if in our own sci-fi works, we may not, part of the beauty of sci-fi is that, we can imagine another more hopeful future or a different future, but there's always going to be these concepts of, or maybe not always, maybe this is your work, but of being othered, right? Being outcast, having some kind of markers that differentiate you from others in the society in which you've designed. I don't know.
Who knows, right? Did Shakespeare write to point these things out, to be controversial just for the sake of it? Was he trying to be a social steward? For me, when I write, I'm not usually writing to make a social statement, right? And
Mhm.
maybe it's not me. Some people do. And that's great. In our writing and in my writing, our writing together in the arms of the void, my writing, my novels, I like to make things acceptable,
Mhm.
but I'm not openly like writing stories just for that purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're not there trying to, as you say, be a deliberate, like, social justice warrior, I suppose, for
Yeah.
a deliberate cause. And I don't have I don't think that we have a mandate to do so, right? We're here to
Mm.
tell stories, or at least I think we are both here to tell stories that we believe there's something in them that's core to something important to us. And I think more about, and as you say, we don't actually know if Shakespeare wrote this as some kind of like social call to action or not. But I like bringing it up because this that concept of otherness in our writing, it's it's for many of our scenarios, it's there, right? There's always social constructs that impact our characters, in certain ways. And I think it kind of fleshes out the story a little bit more if that's something you decide to focus on as
Mhm.
well. Yeah. You know,
Mhm. Well, I had a quote that
bonus
uh,
quote.
yeah. I like quotes, so I'm gonna say, maybe I'm not gonna talk. It's from King John, Act 3, Scene 4. I'm not gonna talk about King John. Like I said, I'm not a connoisseur, but I am a connoisseur of phrases or writing that I think is unique or moving or powerful. And so I did find one from King John, obviously about the life of King John and his problems with France.
Hmm.
This particular scene, Constance's son is taken and she's grieving. That's setting up this quote here. So here I'm gonna go ahead and read it. Thou art not holy to belie me so. I am not mad. This hair I tear is mine. My name is Constance. I was Geoffrey's wife. Young Arthur is my son, and he is lost. I am not mad. I would to heaven I were, for then 'tis like I should forget myself. I don't know. I thought that passage was kind of cool.
It's
And it,
powerful. It's powerful, right? Every word is like, or every phrase, it strikes impact.
yeah. And if you look at the punctuation, and I'm assuming that roughly speaking, that's the way Shakespeare wrote it. I don't know if it was translated, but if you look at the punctuation, at least in modern renditions, you know, and look at how the syllables are um, laid out, you know, I was Jeffrey's wife, semicolon. Young Arthur's my son, and he is lost, period. You
Yeah.
just look at the way that the syllables come out and the different punctuations that's deliberately kind of letting the reader know where the emphasis should be. And I don't know. I just think it's really cool. I would love to write like that, and just in that one passage, we have like, 5 colons, 4 semicolons, a few commas, everything just to get it to come out right. That'd be cool if we could write that way today. I don't know. That's just my silly observations.
No, 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 and it's fun. I think that I would call out that you've made a couple of comments that kind of indicate that you believe your viewpoint is a little bit less than it isn't, right? It's not silly at all. Because you're right. It's powerful stuff, and that's the appeal kind of words, right? In some ways, who needs to be? Nobody needs to be a Shakespeare scholar to understand this, right? She's Jeffrey's wife. She has a son. A son is lost, and she isn't mad, and she wishes she were, because then she could forget, right?
Mm.
I love it, and it resonates pretty well with any, I think, human who's been through some significant portion of life and loss. So, totally support any of your feelings and findings in this topic.
I appreciate that, Helen. You're an awesome human being, and that's why we co-write together.
Yeah, so that's it, right? The transgressive loves and in some cases, punctuations of Shakespeare. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps this episode. Thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned. We're going to have more episodes just like this one. We'll talk again soon. Bye.